So we left off around Genesis 29. We were somewhere in Genesis 29, I think around verse 12 or 13. Let us open up with prayer. Holy Spirit, we welcome you. We take this opportunity to open our hearts and our minds. Lord, invite you to rule and reign here tonight in us and through us, Lord, that you give us, we ask that you give us revelation and wisdom and understanding, Lord, and you continue to help us to grow up into the men and women of God you called us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. All right, so like I said, we are in Genesis 29. Jacob started his trip. We already did Jacob's ladder, where he named it Bethel, where the angels were ascending and descending up and down, and the Lord reestablished the covenant with Jacob. And remember, he left Canaan. Growing up, you have to remember this, he grew up an extremely wealthy young man. Now he's around 40 years old, so he's not that young. You know, you think of him as like an 18-year-old. He's not. Okay? But he is now left, after growing up in luxury, he is left with nothing but his staff. The clothes on his back and a staff in his hand. He has nothing else. All right? And the Lord reestablishes the covenant with him and tells him he will be with him. And then he goes and he finds his father and mother's family by meeting Rachel, first person he meets. And she is his cousin. All right? Now he immediately, if I'm not one who necessarily believes in love at first sight, I believe in lust at first sight. Okay? But the point is, though, immediately she captivated him right off the bat. And that's an important part to the story because Laban catches on to that very quickly. Okay? So anyway, she brings him back to Laban, and Laban grabs him and embraces him, and Laban is his uncle. Okay? The brother of his mother. And so let's pick it up in verse 13. So it came about when Laban heard the news of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Then he related to Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. You are my bone and my flesh, I should say. And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" So Jacob is not a privileged kind of person, even though he grew up that way. He is used to working. Immediately he goes out and starts to help Laban and starts to work for him. All right? And a month later, Laban comes to him and says, what should I pay you? You've been working the whole month. What should your wages be? So Jacob comes up with this clear idea. All right? How about I work for Rachel? I'll give you 7 years of work for Rachel. Now, one thing that we have to get here, which in our culture we have lost completely, is why does he have to work for Rachel? And that is an important detail that we miss. Well, the part of God's culture, which the Lord reestablishes again as law when we get to Leviticus, is that there's something called the dowry. All right? Now, we still have that tradition to some degree when it comes to an engagement ring. And now we're giving up on that pretty much now too. But it has merit. All right? Because the young man has to work and earn something and purchase. Okay? He has to put his money where his mouth is. Now, so really that custom starts with the father would set the bride price for his daughter. And you'd have to come up with it. All right? Now to us, that you may think that seems barbaric, but in almost every single way our culture is barbaric to the Bible. So remember, things to remember when studying Torah. We talked about in the beginning. Let's go back to that. Don't take our culture and judge theirs. All right? This is a godly thing for this one main reason. A young man has to work and earn and prove himself, and he purchases with that dowry. Then the father knows what kind of man he is, right? And he did not get her for free, all right? He should just get her for free. Well, see, there's a lesson here. The lesson is he proved himself. He worked hard and he earned it. That she's worth something, that she's valuable. Okay? That's the lesson. And that's, again, you could see how our culture suffers majorly from not having that. All right? That a father believes his daughter is valuable and is worth something, and you better make sure you understand that. Okay, that's where the now it's like I said, like many of the customs, they're here already in an unwritten form, but they get finalized and when it comes to the law of Moses. But this one is another one, just like you're going to see in the next couple of chapters with that crazy story with Judah and Tamar. You have the Kinsman Redeemer law. All right, that was already a custom that they had before the law of Moses, but that one continues on to be part of it. Okay, so we'll get into that when we get there. Anyway, so Jacob worked 7 years, and of course we have this term bridal week. We can't skip it because it's just is it a prophetic foreshadow? Absolutely, it is. The Lord does nothing randomly. Why does it have to be 7? Because it's complete. Because it's brings you all the way back. Remember, the 7 days is the same book as this one. Okay? The original 7 days. And it's called a bridal week. The other thing that's interesting, too, to me, is that it doesn't seem like this was a brand new idea in the text. Because Laban understands bridal week when after he pulls his treachery, okay, he says, work this bridal week. So obviously there was something probably already in that culture, understanding of a betrothal being set when they're young, and then you work that 7-year week. That was something that must have already been in the culture, all right? Because Laban very clearly understands that and reiterates it. Anyway, so I think there's definite meaning to the 7-year bridal week. I don't have a ton more to it, but it definitely is a foreshadow, I believe, of many other biblical themes. Okay? Anyway, so Jacob, Laban agrees to this term, and Jacob thinks, he's very happy with the arrangement. Now we see in our culture, we'd be like, that's horrible. First of all, you do have to remember life is different when you live for 160 years than when you live for 70. It's a little different, right? Yeah. 7 years for him is like 20 for us, maybe 25 for us. So you have to put that in perspective. The average lifespan at this time is more around like 120 to 130, where our average lifespan has actually come up, but is more like 7. Now you're going to see that continually go down. It's not, by the time we get to David lives to 80, and it calls him, he had a full life. Okay, so it continually comes down. Once you get to David's day and down, 70 years becomes the full of lifespan, really. If you make it past that, you're on bonus time. So you're going to see that steadily come. But Jacob, in his time, 7 years is more like 2 or 3 for us. Okay? In his lifespan. Does everybody get that? That's an important thing, because you're thinking, maybe we should implement that. Well, then if you want to have, people having 15-year-olds when they're 55, then we could do that, but we don't live that long. Now, but why I'm saying that now too is because as you see the ages drop, you'll see the marriage age drop as it goes along. All right? And that's a major thing. Now, a lot of times the man was older than the girl. And that was and you wonder, if you're wondering why it's a cultural thing, And it's mainly because a man has to already have a life, prove, and be able to take care of her. Okay? And the truth is, a woman is in best shape to have children between 18 and 26. She's the healthiest. That God designed it that way. Don't get mad at me. Okay? But it's true. All right? So that is an important thing. They didn't have, they didn't take 3 or 4 years before they started having children like our culture. So that's why putting them, and of course, a man would already have to have approval and would have to have a life before he would even be able to have her. So many times in betrothals, how it would go is a man would be like 22, 25, and a girl would be like 16 when he betrothed, when he asked for her hand. And by the time they get married, she's more like 18, 19. All right? And he already has a home and a life and a job and a way to provide. Okay? That was their culture, and of course, it was completely different than ours. So, they have to get that. But anyway, just so you're wondering about that.
You're saying Jacob was around 40 when he...
Jacob was around 40. Now, I know you'll see that Rachel dies before Jacob. That's because Rachel dies during childbirth, not because she's older. Okay, Rachel is younger than him. It doesn't give us an exact amount, but Jacob is older. All right, and Leah is the older one. Rachel's the younger one. Okay, so anyway, so what happens is Jacob agrees to this. He thinks it's a fair deal, and so he works 7 years, and it says that it felt like days to him because he was so in love with her and was so happy for what was going on. And then, of course, we get to this story that you'll never forget because it's pretty much an unforgettable story. So the wedding day comes. Now, I've had every question in the book. Like I told you, I've had some very curious people over the years who have asked me every question, many questions that are pretty inappropriate. They probably shouldn't have asked, but asked anyway. All right? And of course, this one is always the one that comes up. How could this possibly be? How could this make any sense? How could Jacob not know? And it is a fair question. And let me explain a couple things to you. First of all, it's called alcohol. If you didn't know that, let me, there's 2 times in the Bible where actually, it already happened once with Lot. Remember that. But we're going to get David at a bad time of his life. Tries to pull that one off at a banquet, and he tries to get Uriah to drink a lot so he, will forget his integrity. Okay? So, here, he's at a wedding. They celebrate. Okay? So, I'm sure Laban, knowing what he's going to do, is going to make sure that Jacob has plenty. He's going to keep it flowing. All right? Now, that would seem like, whoa, wow. You've probably thought this out. I've thought this out because I've been asked, like I said, every question under the sun. Another thing is the custom of veils. We still have a remnant of that, but ours has changed a lot. But the veil was a major part of that culture. During the ceremony and anything, he doesn't see her face. She's covered. Okay? And so anyway, truthfully, when it comes to the customs and when it comes to alcohol, and I'm sure a sure amount, it's very possible. Okay?
Poor lady.
Yeah. The victim in this, well, Jacob is a victim too, because he's being lied to. But the real major victim is Leah. Her father did this to her. All right? He totally abused her here. She knows what's going on. All right, so... And I also think that does play into why she had kids first and Rachel was barren. I think the Lord, she named her first couple of kids, that the Lord has vindicated me and the Lord has looked out for me. I think she was absolutely right in naming her kids those things because she was wronged. All right? So there's no way to exactly know that because the text doesn't say it, but it does say later on, then the Lord looked down on Rachel and opened her womb. So the Lord could have done that earlier, chose not to. Right? Mm-hmm. So, anyway. And then this, I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the story, but one of the other reasons why I've came to that conclusion is because, I'll have to jump ahead to get it, but there is a little rule written in the Torah, and it's about rival wives. This practice is taken out and made unlawful of marrying sisters. And you're like, well, Jacob married sisters. Jacob didn't mean to marry sisters. He was forced to. Now, because that's taken away. Do not take on a rival wife and of sisters and loved and unloved, and you cannot change the inheritance rights of a child based on that. That is all. There's a whole detailed chapter on it when we get to the book of Leviticus. And it always brings me back to this story. All right? So the Lord didn't like how Leah was being treated here. He used it, and he blessed them, and he blessed her. But, she was abused. There's no way around that. So again, like I said, it doesn't always, the Bible reads like a newspaper. It doesn't always give you the opinion. You're kind of looking for, isn't somebody going to write in here like what happened to Leah wasn't fair? Wasn't good? You're supposed to use the morality taught that, of course, that wasn't good. It was deceit. And why didn't she say anything? Because she's afraid of her father. Right? All right. So anyway, I hope I cleared all that up and answered all your questions. Some of you might not have been bold enough to answer the questions, but you probably had them on the same. All right? So it's very, 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 very possible for Jacob not to have known. Okay? And anyway, Laban pulls this off. But here's one other thing I want to bring forth that's theological in this story. Now, you look at me, how can I pull theology out of this story? There is a lot of it here. One of the major things is their understanding, which I already told you in the beginning that I was going to prove to you, that God's clear way is sex is marriage. Right. Jacob has been taught that. Laban knows Jacob has been taught that. Why is that so important? Because he knew he could pull this off because of Jacob's integrity and belief system. Integrity and belief system. Why? Because once he has taken Leah, he won't throw her back at him and say, you tricked me, deal's off. Which is, of course, what we would do. Because we have no honor. Right? Isn't that true? But you wonder, why couldn't Jacob just get out of it the next day? He was tricked. He didn't want to marry her. Well, I mean, we can't understand why he would just then accept it when he was lied to and manipulated like that. But why? Because of his integrity. He believed Leah's his wife now. In his mind, that's it. There's no going back. The deal is done. So do you remember when I told you I was going to prove that to you? If you think that I've already made my case, I'm just getting started because it goes all the way through Scripture. All right? And why I want to make that point so strongly, and I know, the main reason is because I believe if we can get this understanding in our hearts, then we can teach it to our children. It's the only way, first of all, the only way they're going to make it while we're living in this evil place that we're living. All right? They have to get this understanding. I was given this understanding as a kid, and it directed my life. I wouldn't be the same person without it. All right? So that's how important it is. Now, if you're older and you've already lived your life when it comes to all of these things, you were made new in Christ. Stop thinking that way. Okay? But don't you think it's important to try to get this into your kids?
Sure.
That's what it's about now, right? And I think that's probably there's a lot of people that try to write all very difficult things and all this kind of things when it comes to sex. And I think that this is the number one teaching on it. If you just take them through this and show them these scriptures in the Bible, the clear teaching of Scripture, in God's eyes, is sex is marriage. There's no separation. As soon as you separate them, you destroy it. The second you separate the two, you destroy it. They're one in God's eyes. All right? Last year, I said that statement that I just said to you. You're obviously in a different place. I said that statement early in the year, and I had someone kind of really have a reaction to it. Wow. And wow, that was an unbelievable statement. But see, for me, I never thought it was an unbelievable statement. Now I realize I guess it is. I didn't think it was. I thought that was a common, understanding. So, but that's why, again, I'm harping on it so much now, is because I see that we have to really get, and if I'm going to make that kind of statement, I have to back it up. All right? So you see that clearly here. That's Jacob can't, if it was me, I'd be like, I'll go to Laban, How could you do this to me? God knows my heart. I was deceived. Right? That's what we'd say. So we say we would have a right to annul it. Isn't that true? Wouldn't you counsel that? If God came to me and said, I'd probably say that to him. But it's clearly here. That's not how Jacob feels. And Laban knew that Jacob wouldn't do that. All right? So he knew he would accept it. Now Leah is his wife, period. And Leah, although she might not be the most attractive, ends up bringing great honor to him.
This is a blood covenant at that point.
Yes, exactly. But I just want to get that, many people can read the Bible, but for some reason they never get that point. And that's why really, it is a major point. Okay, so, anyway, Jacob wakes up the next morning, realizes it's Leah. Imagine her face. You feel terrible for her. All right? And he goes to Laban and says, how could you do this to me? But Laban already knows he already has a plan. His plan is, okay, well, he knows he's not going to give up on Rachel. And he knows he has integrity, so he's not going to throw Leah out now. Because in that culture, first of all, she would be broken material now.
Mm-hmm.
All right?
It's part of the blood covenant.
Mm-hmm. She would already lose, be taken off the lot and devalued now. I'm sorry to say it in those terms, but in that culture, that's how it would be. She would now have less standing to get married again. So Jacob wouldn't do that to her, right? So Laban knows, but he knows he won't give up on Rachel, so he says, okay, give me 7 more years of work, and I'll give you Rachel, because it's not our custom. We can't get the younger before the older. You have to have the older first. It's just the way it is, man. Sorry. So Jacob accepts it. He accepts it. And I think some of it, I think Jacob in the back of his mind is thinking, what I did and how I received the blessing, and how can I be so, I can't be filled with anger and indignation now. I think some of that's in the back of Jacob's mind and guides him through this. All right? And accepts it. Anyway, so he works 7 more years for Rachel. And then he goes to Laban and says, come on. For both times, they're right at the 7 years. Like in the text, it makes it seem like the minute it was 7 years, he went to him and said, okay, now's the time. All right? So then he's given Rachel, and anyway, so let me go into this. There's another major thing that you need to get. And it always comes up, I always get this question. Why would Laban do this? Why? What's his motivation? His motivation may be different than you think. Why would he do this and try to get both of his daughters to one man? First of all, knowing that would probably make them rivals, which it would, and it did. They eventually grew to understand their situation as they got older, but when they were younger, it was rivals, right? So Laban must have known that. Why would he do that? Well, see, Laban understands something. The blessing of Abraham and the covenant of Abraham. He has been blessed since the minute Jacob came and worked for him. His whole business went from, local to international. Okay? And Laban absolutely knows, which he says later, he knows he's being blessed because of Jacob. And he doesn't want to lose it. He's also in his mind, his views, but in his mind, I'm not saying this is God's mind, in his mind, he's also thinking, how can I do anything better for my daughters? I'm giving them to Jacob. They're going to be part of the blessing of Abraham. I'm going to get them both in there. And then I'm going to make him make a covenant that he can't ever take any other women. Remember, Laban makes him take that at the end. Makes him swear that. Okay? This thing kept doing this last week. Why is it doing that? Didn't do it on Sunday, and now every Bible school seems to come off my ear. Anyway, so that's Laban's underlining motivation. Okay? And he doesn't, he may have been able to justify what he did to Leah, thinking that she is now going to be blessed and taken care of. All right? In his mind, doesn't mean it's right. It's not right, but that was probably his thinking. Okay? And the truth is, he was right. They are going to be incredibly blessed. They are going to be well taken care of, and they are going to be part of the godly lineage. Doesn't mean his actions were right, but his estimation of the blessing on Jacob was right. Okay? So, anyway, that's why Laban would do this. And of course he got 14 years of work out of it, and 14 years of blessing, where his entire life was turned upside down and blessed. And we don't get some of the details till after the story. You don't get the fact that he changed his wages 10 times until after. Now I'm going to jump into the children thing. Now listen, you know how pretty much up until this point we've been going verse by verse. Sometimes I didn't. Now we're going to be more just getting into the storyline. I'm not always going to be going verse by verse. I'm going to be hitting the highlights and going through the storyline. All right? But that's why it's so important for you to have already read it before class, because I'm not going to be rereading every single verse. I'm just going to be going through the story. All right? And dealing with questions that could arise. Okay, so then we have this whole situation. Now Jacob, like I told you before, Jacob only wanted to marry Rachel. But he ended up with 4 wives, not 1. And what's interesting in the story is that all 3 were actually brought on him, that he didn't choose them. Okay? And that's what happened. And of course, remember when I explained to you the whole concubine thing before? I know another thing is difficult, but I told you have to get used to it, because it's going to be all over the place. All right, well, you see, this story really brings out what I was explaining to you. You see concubine as a sex slave, but in this culture, it's actually God's culture, which doesn't mean that the practice is right. It's not the point. But their understanding is you can't sleep with a woman and then throw her out. Once you take her, she's yours. You have to take care of her the rest of her life. So that is the point. And you see that it goes back and forth between his servant, his maid servants, right, concubine, and wife. That term is used multiple times through this whole thing, and as through their lives. Now, what is that? Why is that important? It's important to see that Zilpah and Bilhah are not just slaves. The point is, though, they have secondary inheritance rights, but Jacob has claimed those children all, because Rachel and Rachel and Leah are using them as surrogates, okay? And all children are Jacob's sons. But yet Jacob now takes care of them as his own, and it uses the term as well as wife. So the better term, I know it may annoy you, but I think it's a better term. We can get away from the term that that you don't have to explain to children, okay? The better term would be secondary wife. Not that that makes us happy, but...
So they didn't have ceremonies for them? They just gave them over, like...
I don't know.
Gifts?
I don't know. I don't really know. I don't have an answer for that. I'm sure some cultures they did, some cultures they didn't. All right? The one thing you have to see, though... See, if you don't get this, you'll think... culturally, you'll always look down. Don't do that. The main point here is that these women are taken care of. And the other you know what the most important thing to these people?
Children.
Children. Having children is the most important thing. Again, don't think our culture is good and compare it to them, because we're the evil culture. We make children a problem. Children are annoying. Children make life difficult. In their culture, there is no greater prize. There is no greater gift than children. You understand? So we're the sick ones. Okay, because we make children a curse. You understand?
Yeah.
They mess up our lives, is what they do. See, so it's totally flipped around. God loves children. God loves people. He said, be fruitful and multiply. It was his idea. Okay? So, but you have to get that. These women, first of all, their children will be taken care of and blessed. Zilpah and Bilhah's children become pretty much, prince and princesses. Okay? You understand? So they're not getting a bad deal here. It may not be, you may have watched so many romantic movies, you may really think it's horrible, but they'd probably be living on the street somewhere if it wasn't for this situation. I'm not saying with that, though, that this is God's. I already explained to you how God always throws them back to, in the beginning, it was meant to be one man and one woman. I remember I already explained to you, I don't want to explain it all again. That's how it was weeded out of the church, because the Lord sent us back, right? And here what's interesting is, though Jacob had that mindset and yet wasn't able to fulfill it. Jacob only wanted to marry one woman. Okay? So, anyway, so that's the situation. So let me just go through the story then. So we know what happens. He gets tricked, but he keeps Leah. Leah's his wife for 7 years. Then he has Rachel. 7 more years for Rachel. So then Bilhah starts to have children right away. I mean, not Bilhah. Leah starts to have children right away. And she names the first 3 children all as a slap at her father. And Jacob, really, and Jacob allows it. He could have vetoed the names, but he doesn't. Because I'm sure that, and you know what? The other thing that's clear in the story is that you grow to love people. Because Jacob grows to love Leah. She's part of his life, right? She just wasn't intended originally, okay? But she names the kids, God has vindicated me because God has looked at me as God has seen that I have not loved. So that's what the first 3 names are, okay? And then, so then Rachel is starting to get really upset because she's barren. Now, have we seen this before? Yes, we have. And she can't have kids. And again, in this culture, when you can't have children, it's like there's a curse on you. You're filled with the ultimate shame. All right? So Rachel can't take it anymore. So she gives Jacob her maidservant, Bilhah, okay, and says, take her, sleep with her, and then I can have a child through her. Okay? And anyway, so he does, but it also clearly says in the text, so Jacob took her as his wife. And you're like, what? All right? It says it. Read it. Okay? So the point is, so then Bilhah conceives, and now Rachel feels like she's at least in the game here. And then the time goes on, and Bilhah has a couple children. A couple sons. Now, one thing that's not mentioned is the daughters except for one. And Dinah is mentioned because of what happens to Dinah in Shechem. We're going to get to that horrible story. Doesn't mean there wasn't any other daughters. There was other daughters. The thing is that the lineage was going through the men, and that's why they're the ones named. Okay? Dinah was specifically named because she becomes, there's a major story that surrounds her later on. Okay? Anyway, so then Leah starts to feel jealous. Okay? Leah starts to feel jealous that now Rachel's having children and through Bilhah. I know it's confusing. Okay? So then Leah can't take it anymore, so then she gives Jacob Zilpah, her maidservant, and says, sleep with her so that I can have her sons through her, because now I'm not having any kids anymore. And then, so then Zilpah has a couple of sons. Okay? And then after that, then it says the Lord looks down on Rachel and sees her and then opens her womb. See, of course, the biblical understanding, the Hebrew mindset written by Moses is who is the one that controls these things? God. Now that is a very theological thing. There's no way around it. All right? The Lord did it. Okay? And all of a sudden Rachel becomes pregnant. All right? And she's a little older at this point. And she becomes pregnant with Joseph. And then Rachel has one more child, Benjamin, the last one, and she dies during childbirth with Benjamin. All right? Now, of course, if you're younger and you don't know anything about history, you don't realize that before modern medicine, many women died during childbearing. Okay? It was a common thing. Now, many men died during war, so there was just a lot of death. All right? So but a major way where women would die is, you would have 20% that would die in childbearing. And that's,
Still a major issue for most of the third world.
yes, in places where there isn't modern medicine, it still happens on a regular basis. All right? So, anyway, I just jumped ahead with that part, but I went through, now this becomes the 12 sons. So here we have 12 sons of Jacob. His name isn't Israel yet. All right? But that's important to get this so you understand. The 12 sons of Jacob, Jacob's name is changed to Israel. They become the 12 sons of Israel, who becomes the 12 tribes of Israel. Now notice that that with Abraham, it was Isaac. The Lord said Isaac, but Rebekah became pregnant with 2 sons, and the Lord specifically chose Jacob. Right? We know that. It wasn't... Now Jacob had to fight for it, but Jacob was chosen. Now, I always wondered, I thought about this. I know this is just... I'm going to take a sip before I say this, because this one might make you think. Now, this is just some things that I've been thinking about. This is just opinion here, but consider this. Why did God do this with Esau and Jacob? Because if they only had one, if there wasn't, the she got pregnant with twins and that whole thing where the Lord chooses them while they're in the womb and blah, 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 then it would have been the sons of Isaac. Right? But the Lord orchestrated that, I believe, as a teaching tool and as a way to train Jacob. All of those things were orchestrated. Because now the Lord makes the covenant and says to Jacob all of his offspring. Right? So it's no one is chosen. All of Jacob's offspring are Israel. Okay? And, of course, with the 2 maidservants, I see an awesome picture of the Gentiles being grafted in. Am I reaching for a picture? I don't believe so. They're everywhere. They're all over the place. All right? Those 2 were brought into the blessing of Abraham, and even though they didn't mean to be, but they were, right? So that's an important thing. And of course, there was 2 and 2, and I see that as another picture of that. But like Dad says, he has. If you look at the notes, he has one there with Abraham and Abraham's servant going out, as the Holy Spirit and getting a wife for his son and blah, blah, blah. But then he writes this little thing, but we can't go too far with these types and shadows as some people do. Which is important because types and shadows are everywhere, but we don't then build whole theologies off of them. Okay? So I clearly see a shadow there of the Gentiles being grafted in right there in the beginning. Okay? And I think it's very clear that Bilhah and Zilpah were brought in, and their bloodlines were brought in to the blessing of Abraham and the covenant of God, right? And as we didn't look for the Lord, he looked for us. They weren't looking for it, but they were grabbed and brought into it. All right? Here's the other thing. The Lord knew how these women would respond and set them up to do this. And you say, well, why would the Lord do that? Well, Jacob, the sons of Israel, will become the nation. He had 12 sons. Okay? And I think that even though it may not have been exactly God's plan or any of that, or, I'm not going to get into all of that. The point is God used it either way to bring about his purpose. All right? That is clear. And you see that I think that just is very clear that the Lord used it and orchestrated it and brought it about so that Jacob would have 12 sons. And of course, Jacob, all of his children become the children of Israel. And they're called the children of Israel until they come out of Egypt. All right? So, let's get back to the storyline. So that's how it all happened. And I told you later on in Torah, in the law of Moses, taking 2 sisters as rival wives becomes illegal. All right? And it always reminds me back to this story. Okay? Anyway, so Jacob is blessed, okay? Now I have to get into this one story, I guess, here. I always try to skip it, but I always get questions about it, and I'm sure some of you had some, so I'll get into it. The mandrakes, okay? And really why this story is in here is just to show the situation. This explains the situation. First of all, you know that they're making deals with each other that who can get Jacob when he comes home from work. Okay? And he usually chooses to go with Rachel, but the other women get neglected, so they're making deals with Rachel. So who gets to claim Jacob when he comes home? That's the situation. All right?
Tired fella.
You know?
My heart goes out to him.
Yeah. Exactly. But either way, but one thing you have to understand, you know, we think about is, what, you know, if we don't get it, the one thing you can take out of it, I'm not saying we apply this to any of it, but the one thing you can apply and take out of it is their desire and blessing for children and how they love and want to have children. And that is a major part of this. See, we only think about sex in those terms of sexual pleasure, not children. And of course, it is both. But when we major on one and skip the other, we're missing a major part of it. And one thing you learn from this is that these women want Jacob and they want to have children. Okay? And we're going to see that story later on with Judah and Tamar. That's the major part of that story as well. Okay?
Well, he didn't have much to say. He'd come in and they tell him.
Yeah, he comes in, and that's why this part is in here. He comes in and they already have it worked out where Jacob's going tonight. And he's got 4 tents. All right? So.
Over there, boy.
Oh, you didn't have a choice. You didn't know where he was going.
All right. So one thing, though, you have to get also from this, too, though, I believe, is a lesson that we can glean from it, is that Jacob cares for all 4 of these women. And that's a big thing. They all become his, and he takes care of all of them till the day they die. All right? So you can't just throw that detail out. That's an important detail. All right? All right, so let's go. Now we're going to get into, now you notice in verse 21 that Dinah is mentioned specifically, and that's because of what happens later on with Dinah. All right? A very terrible story. All right, did I answer most all your questions that you might have come up? I'm sure you can't get through those stories without a bunch of questions coming up, especially if you're doing it for the first time. So I try to preempt the ones I would think you have and the things that don't necessarily make sense. And a lot of these things are cultural, all right? In this culture, the number one most important thing is to have children. All right, so that's why some of the things we don't understand why they do what they do, but why would they give their maidservants to Jacob to take him as secondary wives? Well, we can't understand that, but in their mind, they want to have kids, period. That's it. There's no other thing outside of that. There's no other motivation other than that. All right?
It's also a very significant part of an agrarian culture.
Well, it is. You a big family, you more workers. All that is true. We're going to get into all that, difference between the industrial age and children up until the industrial age were the number one way you could be blessed. Because guess what children are? Workers.
Indentured servants.
Okay? So why would you want to have a big family? First of all, the more people you have and the more sons you have, the more work you get done. That's just the way it is. All right? Now, the industrial age gave us machinery and made it the opposite, where we live in a culture now where children are so expensive, that, and I think that also comes down to the contraception issue. I guess I might as well get into it now. It always comes up. I always get asked it. I always get asked it every year. Before we started doing the camera, no one can ask me questions during class, but many other times I've been asked the question. All right? So I think that is the real answer, though, is culturally. Truthfully, right now, we can't afford. I couldn't afford to take care of 6, 7 children. Because each one of them comes with a $30,000, $40,000 price tag. So our culture is so flipped around, which we think we're so great, is the more children you have, the more difficult life becomes. Instead of in this culture, the more children you have, the better life is.
Yeah.
It's the total opposite. Okay? So, but truthfully, if you owned a nice big ranch farm in Montana, you'd want to have lots of kids. All right? So, it's a lot different here in New York. But I think that is a major part of it. Okay? It is. And the truth is, but the one thing I don't, obviously I believe in contraception, but I'm going to put in this little thing. I only have 2 kids, you all know that. We went through a lot, we had major physical problems, we lost a child, and it happened multiple times in a row, and we didn't want to take that chance again. All right? But I understand that, it's all different depending on your situation in life, and I don't want to put any of that on anybody. I think the one thing we do have to remember with it is we cannot lose the value and blessing of children. That's what we can't lose. We don't want to lose that. All right, my generation despises children. They worship them when they come, but they'll have one and they'll worship and spoil them. But the truth is they only have one because they'll mess up their life, or they'll only do this because of this. The truth is we cannot lose. We have to keep the blessing that God gives. The children are a blessing, an incredible blessing. That we can't lose. Our culture has made it so that only us small families can survive. That's absolutely true. I can only barely afford the 2 I have. And now that my son is getting older, I can't, my grocery bill's gone from here to here. Okay? It's unbelievable. All right? So I get that. Most of us can't afford it. And I don't believe, having 10 kids so the government can take care of them is godly either.
No.
I don't think, so it isn't. All right? But if I was a loaded person, if I had, if I was wealthy, I'd have more kids. Absolutely would. Well, I'd have to get Jen on board with that, but I would want to. All right. The point is, so like people look at if you have actually the famous ones that we all know, right? Of course, is the Duggars. All of us have heard of them and know them. I respect them a lot. But truth is, he has a lot of money, and he's able to personally take care of each one of them and give each one of them a job, which he's done. All right, and a house. That's a different situation. Okay? So that's much more like the situations that they have in this culture. Okay? So anyway, I think that you can't, when it comes down to that issue, if we lived in an agricultural society right now, we wouldn't even be talking about this. We'd want to have lots of kids. We all would. All right? So that's really the main difference that has changed. Anyway. If you have more to ask about that, that's all I'm going to say about that. If you have more to talk to me about that, or you want to yell at me and tell me I'm wrong, you can do it after class. Okay? So, that's my 4 cents on the issue. So let's go to now. We get some details as the story moves on. Now, we don't really get what happened until after. We don't get this bit that Laban has been changing his wages 10 times and constantly cheating him and stealing from him. We don't get that until later on when Jacob tells us that situation until afterward. Okay? So if you're wondering, we get this before about the what he's doing with the animals, the spotted and speckled. So what happens after the 14 years, Jacob goes to Laban and says, okay, I've worked for you 14 years, but now I need to go and do something for myself and build my own family, my own life, right? And but Laban doesn't want him to go. Because Laban knows, all right, that he's been blessed through Jacob. He even says that I've learned through divination. All right, again, like a newspaper doesn't mean that God supports that, actually hates it, and makes it a punishable by death when we get to the law of Moses, okay, so if you're wondering. But the point is, and that word also doesn't exactly mean it can be translated different ways. He's learned spiritually, discerned. It doesn't necessarily mean through divination as in witchcraft, but it could. All right? Anyway, the point is that he's learned spiritually, you could say, that God, the God of Abraham, is blessing him and all that he has because of Jacob. That's the reason. And he flat out says it. All right? So, and then everything he tries to do to Jacob, it goes the opposite. Every plan he has, it goes the opposite way. So, he doesn't want Jacob to leave, and he's trying anything he can to keep him. And so then he says, okay, so what should I do for you? So then Jacob says, okay, I'll make this deal. Now, of course, he knows Laban's going to take this deal. And what you don't get in this, I remember when I read this as a teenager, I didn't understand this part. Actually, a lot of the things, the very adult things, when I read this when I was younger, it just went over your head. Thank God somehow we can just not catch half of that, right? But anyway, that, I didn't completely understand the farming part of this. And I don't completely understand either. I am the farthest thing in the world from a farmer. But this question has been answered to me by people who do know the answer. And I did know this bit, that most of the time that the speckled and spotted and blemished animals are the weaker animals. And that was most of the time how it always was. And you wonder, why would Jacob say that and why would Laban go for it? It's because Jacob was pretty much saying, I'll take the weak and messed up ones. Like the black lamb is not the one they celebrate. You understand?
Right.
Black sheep is not the one they celebrate. So what Jacob is saying to Laban is that I will take all the second class ones. That's all will be mine. And you get all the best. And I will go through your flocks and take all speckled, spotted, or blemished animals, and they'll be mine. And then any animal, that's all I can have. If any animal comes out that doesn't have those things, it'll be considered stolen. Of course, Laban is probably looking at this kid. Kid, you are really dumb. And he's probably, of course, Jacob. That sounds. You know what? That's a good idea, Jacob. That's great. And Laban thinks that this kid is ridiculous. Right? So, but he doesn't know that the Lord spoke to him. Now, we don't get that until after. Yeah. But the Lord had already spoke to Jacob, given him this dream. And the Lord gave him this dream of setting up this post. And he has speckled, spotted, and blemished animals. And if he puts up the post, they come in front of the post, and they'll mate, and they'll produce exactly stronger animals each time. All right? So Jacob has this dream. So the Lord tells Jacob exactly what to do. But Jacob has to take a leap of faith. We love that term. I kind of hate that term now because it's... But anyway, Jacob, by faith, believes the message that God gave him and takes a crazy chance here. Because Jacob has been doing this a long time. He knows what he's saying is ridiculous. Okay? But he is trusting that God gave him that message and that God is going to use it to bless him. All right? And of course, that's exactly what happens. Jacob takes the spotted, speckled, and blemished animals. He sets up the post. They come. The whole thing happens, and he becomes blessed, and all of his flocks and herds triple and become healthy and powerful. And of course, Laban continues to get jealous. Then his sons start to get jealous and angry. All right? And they're like, Jacob has taken everything from us. And Laban knows that God is doing it. All right, no matter whatever they set up, it changes to go Jacob's way. Because then that's where the 10 payments change. It's that Laban then tries to come in and correct it, and then the Lord does the opposite.
Well, right at the point of making that deal, it shows immediately the next statement is, the deceit that was there in Laban.
Yes, Laban knew exactly what he was doing.
Pull them all out of the flock.
Yep, Laban knew exactly what he was doing, but he didn't know that God was using this to bless Jacob and to show that God is for him. And of course, that's why Laban, is all talk, but he wouldn't do anything to Jacob because he's scared. That's flat out the truth. So eventually, though, Jacob realizes, and he tells by Laban's sons how they're treating him, and the Lord is putting pressure now on him because the Lord is putting pressure on Jacob because Jacob has to go back. God is making it uncomfortable for him now. God spoke to him. He wants him to go. All right? He has to go back to Canaan. So the Lord is making it difficult. So then Jacob calls out Leah and Rachel at night in a family meeting. All right? And you know what's interesting here, what I like about this too, is that Jacob includes them both and wants their opinion and tells them the whole story. And what's interesting too is that he obviously hasn't told them this story before. He's been just letting them think everything's fine. But you notice that Leah and Rachel both now are completely loyal to Jacob. He's obviously won their hearts, right? And they say, no, our father treats us now as a foreigner, and he's continually taken all this stuff from us, and we were supposed to be inheritance, but we don't even have an inheritance now. Jacob had to earn it all. Nothing was given, right? And so anyway, they both say, whatever the Lord has shown you, we're on board with it. Something, that's my own version. So anyway, now Jacob knows he's going to go. But one of the reasons why he had to do that is because he is not going to make a big thing about it. They're going to sneak away. Now, why is he doing that? Because he doesn't trust Laban at all. That's why he's doing it. Laban then comes and pretends like he's the father of the year and tries to say that, why would you do this to me? I hug my grandchildren and blah, blah, blah. But because Jacob does not trust him. That's why. That's the whole reason why Jacob tries to do this covertly. All right? So anyway, Jacob flees, and then Laban takes a bunch of men and hunts them down and starts screaming and yelling at him. But what happened the night before is that Laban has a dream. And a clear warning from God to not say anything to Jacob, good or bad, but just don't say anything to him. So the Lord deals with Laban and puts fear into him. Laban goes and he kind of talks a big amount. Oh, you did this to me and you couldn't even tell me. And you take my children and my daughters and I can't even kiss them goodbye. Blah, blah, blah. He's just whining because there's nothing he can do about it. But then Jacob lets him have it. He finally lets him have it for 20 years of him abusing him, lying to him, and trying to take advantage of him. Okay, and then Laban stops him and says, all they're mine, all the kids are mine, all the children are mine, all the flocks are mine, blah, 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 baloney, and they all know it. Okay? But that's how it goes. But then Laban throws out this thing. Well, I skipped the story. Let me go to the first thing, and I'll come back to that. He says, fine, but why did you steal my gods? And of course, all of us went. When Rachel took them, they were all like, what did she do? I remember I was like, what? I always get that question. How could Rachel do it? Doesn't she know better? Why would Laban have these? I thought. Now, I want to explain this to you so you don't have a problem here anymore, because if you have that idea, you're going to have a problem a lot. There's mixture. There's always mixture. All right? Now, one thing that's clear is you're going to see a couple chapters later, the Lord really comes and meets with Jacob, and Jacob gathers them all together and says, get rid of your household gods, and get rid of your idols, and commit ourselves to the Lord. In order for him to do that, they must have had them. Right? They must have been astray in some of those areas very clearly already for him to have to do that. All right? So Rachel grew up in a house with her father and obviously had some kind of connection to these idols. Now, if you say, do you have idols? But I thought he believed in the God of Abraham. He does, but it doesn't mean that he's completely loyal. And that's the issue. And you're going to find that many, many times there's a mixture. All right, there's truth and then error mixed in. All right? So that's what's going on here. The other thing, too, you have to remember is that the Lord, in God's view, even if it's an image made to be him or made to be anything, it's still an idol. See, we think there's a little Buddha or something, right? But even if it's some kind of image for Yahweh or any of those things, in God's eyes, that's wicked. Right? No graven image. You know what that means? No graven image. All right? We do not worship images or statues. We don't worship pictures or beads. Right? I know. Okay. So, anyway, but then we have this story where Jacob just lays into him. We didn't take anything from you. We wouldn't take it. But then he says, if you find it here, whoever took it, let them be put to death. Jacob's pretty confident. Little does he know, because he has no idea Rachel took them. All right? But Rachel's crafty, and as soon as she sees this whole thing, she has him stuffed underneath her, and she's on a horse. All right? Not in her tent. It goes through all the tents, and the very last thing to check is Rachel's saddlebag. But as soon as her father comes up, she plays the card that all fathers will always walk away from. I've already had to experience this myself. Right? He comes up, and she says, excuse me, I didn't stand, but, have my period, and then most fathers will go, okay then.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I need to hear. Don't say another word. Right? And that she played the card, and of course it worked, because then he was having no business of that then. Right? So, so then he never found them. But she did have them. And then, so the whole thing happens, they're going back and forth, and finally Laban again shows that he knows exactly why he was blessed, because he makes a covenant with Jacob. He says, let us make a covenant and a treaty that this will be a boundary stone, that you won't come. And what is he? He's thinking about his descendants coming back and taking over all his stuff. Because he knows the blessing is on him. All right?
Now, but just to back it up a little bit, when he was told not to say anything, he had that dream and he was told not to say anything, but he went right up to Jacob and he said something.
He said something, but he didn't curse him one way or the other. He just said he shouldn't have left without saying goodbye. Right?
Okay.
So he's like playing the line here. He wants to. He's angry, but he can't do much about it. All right? So, anyway, but he clearly makes a covenant. And then he says that these daughters of mine will be all, and you will swear that you will never take any other women other than these daughters of mine. Right? And of course, that was part of their covenant. They make a treaty, and then Laban goes back home, and Jacob goes. One problem solved. Now Jacob has another huge one coming. His next major problem is, how does he deal with Esau? All right, which is tricky. In the back of his mind, he's been thinking that the whole time. Also why he was a little reluctant to come home, and why the Lord had to put pressure on him and push him. Right? Because he knows what he has to deal with. Esau. Esau's a scary guy. All right? So, Jacob's coming back, and he takes his two, he hears that Esau is coming and has 400 men with him. And of course, immediately he's thinking he's coming to wipe us out. This is it. He's been waiting for his chance. Right? So he splits now. It's a big group of people now. So he splits them into halves. And what he's thinking is, if I split in half, at least if Esau attacks one group, the other group will live. He can get away, he can run. That's what he's had to deal with. All right? So he splits them up into two companies. But what he does before that is he sends all these servants ahead with all these gifts, all kinds of money and all monetary things and food and all these gifts, and like droves of gifts. So Esau has to come, and he constantly gets bombarded with each one of these droves of gifts from your servant. And you notice that he tells each one of them very specifically to say, these are gifts from your servant Jacob. And that wording is key, because he's showing humility, and honoring Esau. And he's hoping to pacify him. He's hoping that he'll, accept, okay, well, I'm not coming here acting like I have everything. I'm going to be very humble, and maybe he'll accept me. It's my only chance. Right? Or maybe I can bribe him. All right? So he's sending all this stuff ahead, and then finally Esau comes through, and Esau has the exact opposite reaction that Jacob expects. And Esau has now accepted the situation. He's accepted that this was God's will. And so anyway, Esau does the opposite and comes running to Jacob and embraces him and kisses him. And they cry. And it's been 20 years. All right? And anyway, of course, Jacob now is elated because he has he's received a favorable reception. I could not think of the word from Esau. And of course he's blessed and blah, blah, blah. Now I want to get to another story that is in the middle of this, but it's really, I want to spend some time on this one. Now, before he meets Esau, okay, the night before, he's getting ready, he's separating everything, he's stressed, he's anxious, he's really scared, all these things. He sees this man, but he obviously knows there's something else to this man, because he's drawn to him, he goes after him. And he tries to get him to bless him. So obviously, I think the story is clear that Jacob knew that there was something else going on here. I don't think Jacob just went to try to have WrestleMania and I think the text is pretty clear. Jacob knew that this was an angel. All right? He's heard Abraham and Isaac, he understands. So he goes and tries to get a blessing, but the angel won't give him one. You say, why would God do this? Because it's an exercise for Jacob. He wants to see how far he'll go. So he won't. So Jacob wrestles with him. And the angel's wrestling around. Because I always thought about, you have to think about this one for a while to get it. Why would they do this? Why would... So he's trying to get him to bless him because he knows that this is an angel. He has a blessing from God. And the angel is provoking him, saying no. So Jacob is wrestling and he's like, no, let you go to a blessing. And the angel's trying to get away from him. You wonder, why would God do this? I thought about this for a while. And, you think of, what is the reason for this? What is this story? Why would God do a thing like this? And I think there's only one answer. All right? First of all, what does he receive after this? He receives a new name. A name that will live forever. Right? And again, like everything else, Jacob had to earn it. There's nothing was given to Jacob. He had to earn everything. Right? And he had to earn this blessing. And he had to show he wanted it. Remember, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. The writer of Hebrews says, make sure none of you are godless like Esau, who traded in his birthright for a bowl of soup. What does that mean? Esau didn't care. He didn't care. And Jacob cares. And I think, again, this is an exercise that Jacob is proving how bad he wants the blessing of God. So he's wrestling with him. And can you imagine the scene that the angels, no, get off me. No, I'm not giving you anything. And Jacob, I won't let you go. And he jumps on him again. We would think that's ridiculous, but it's God testing him. And eventually, Jacob is so, persistent. He's so persistent that the angel finally eventually just says, he taps out, okay, and Jacob, hits the ground. He could have done that hours ago, right? The angel wanted him to wrestle. Because then he just puts an end to it. Hits his hip and all of a sudden it goes out of joint. Jacob falls to the ground. He's probably going, oh great, I did all that for nothing. But he earned it. He earned it. He earns a blessing. You think, but God wouldn't put Jacob in pain for the rest of his life, would he? Well, he walks with a limp the rest of his life from this. As a sign of the blessing. Imagine that. So then the angel says, he goes, what is your name? My name is Jacob. He goes, your name will now be Israel, for you have strived with God and men and have overcome. And Israel means he who strives with God. All right? And so his name is changed to Israel. And you notice from that point on, Moses starts to refer to him as Israel. Once in a while he throws in Jacob there so make sure you know what's going on. And then later on, the Lord reiterates the name Israel to him again. And he names that place Yahalan, Israel. Okay? And he goes back and now he's the next day when he meets, all this stuff happens, Jacob is walking with a limp. And I'm sure they're all asking him about it. All right? And of course, so the exercise, you wonder, why would God do such a thing? Why would God test him that way? I believe, again, it was all about Jacob. How bad did Jacob want the blessing of God? How bad did he want the covenant? How bad did he want, the lineage of Abraham, the covenant line? How bad did he want it? Jacob had to go a long way for it, didn't he? He really did. And of course, the angel finally puts it to bed. And then he's thinking, well, can you heal this, hip problem? Right? But the Lord keeps it. And you're like, why would they do that? And of course, Moses throws in the thing about from this day on, the Israelites do not eat this tendon, on any animal, because to remember as a sign of respect that God touched that tendon. All right? And it also is clear that Jacob walked with a limp the rest of his life. Wow. We wouldn't think God would do that. Well, he did. And it's a sign. And every time Jacob walks with a limp and you look at him, you remember the time the Lord changed his name to Israel. And he fought for the blessing. Every time. Right? So, anyway, that's the story. And then, of course, he meets Jacob the next day. Jacob embraces him. He's received favorably. And he tries to even leave men with him. And then Esau tries not to take any of the gifts. He's like, no, I have plenty. I don't need anything. You're not going to give me anything. Jacob persists. And Esau reluctantly receives the gifts and goes back. And Jacob slowly makes his way back because he's got lots of flocks and lots of kids. And so as he's making his way back, then we have this awful story. Okay? Which is in the end of chapter 33.
Isn't it kind of interesting he doesn't want to dwell with Esau, though?
Oh, it's very interesting. He doesn't want to dwell with Esau because he knows he can't. He knows he has to be separate and he has to make his own family. He doesn't want to get into any of those situations anymore. All right? But Esau knows it and moves away out of respect for the blessing. Esau then packs up and moves away from the land of Canaan and obviously becomes the Edomites. And we'll go through that lineage soon. It catches us up on Esau's line and all that. Okay? So, I didn't just pull the cord out of that. No, that's good. So, but then we get into this really difficult story here. Okay? And it is difficult. So, as they're making their way back, and they're settling because Jacob takes a long time settling and he moves around. He settles in Shechem. Okay? And what happens is, once he gets to this place, one of the princes of this city comes out and finds Dinah, one of Jacob's daughters, and rapes her. All right? And he then tries to go ask for her hand in marriage after he raped her. Okay? And Jacob hears about this and is incredibly troubled, but knows that his sons are going to be, indignant. Right? And but you have to remember, in Jacob's position, which he tells his sons that they don't understand, is that he doesn't have a standing army. That if people band together and come out to try to destroy him, obviously the Lord will protect him, but the point is that he has to tread very lightly in these areas, right? So, then Shechem's father says, go out and get this girl for me to be my wife, blah, blah, blah. So he comes to Jacob but the boys are there, and they meet him. Now, remember, there's 12 of them. It doesn't mean all 12. Specifically, the 2 that went were Dinah's full brothers, not half-brothers. All right? And they, devise a plan. Very crafty plan. And now, one thing I want you to see as well, though, is don't think that Shechem's father has good motivations here. Because when he goes and meets with the townsmen, he exposes his heart that he will gladly do this because he wants all those goods and all the riches that they have. Because he says, surely all their wealth will be ours. So he has an evil motivation. That is very clear. Okay? But he says to Jacob doesn't know what to do. He's not completely sure how to handle this. Of course, he's probably angry and furious, but he has to tread lightly to try to keep everybody alive. He doesn't want to go to war, right? But his sons then come up with this plan. He says to Shechem and Shechem's father, well, we couldn't possibly give her to any uncircumcised man. And then probably very righteously explains the circumcision given by Abraham and how they're blessed and blah, blah, blah. And then their guys are listening, but then they're thinking, okay. So they go back and propose this to the men of the city. Now, what did Shechem's father see when he went out to meet Jacob? The wealth, incredible wealth. He saw, put it in our modern terms, he saw mucho dinero. All right? And he wanted it. And he pitched this. You think, why would he even pitch this to the men of the city? Why would they go for this? For wealth. That's why they would go for it. So it goes to them, men of the city. Now these men have come, and Shechem wants to take his daughter as a wife, but they have this rule about this circumcision custom that they all have, and they probably actually explained to him, pretty graphically being explained. Blah blah blah. We'll skip that part. And anyway. But then he exposes his heart and he says, but surely all that they have will be ours. He's like, he's thinking, if I woo in this big other major corporation, won't we all be blessed, right? He's making a merger here. And his point is thinking that it could majorly benefit them, because if they start to intermarry and they settle within a generation, all that wealth will be theirs. Right? And that's how he pitched this to the men. And of course, greed got the best of them. And they thought, it's a couple days of pain and, whatever, but that might be a good deal. Really, if you think about it. So they said yes. So all of the men of the city were circumcised. And there was, I'll just let you think about that for a second. No, I was kidding. Don't think about it. Don't think about it at all.
Too late.
I'll tell you, painful is what I think of. Anyway, so they did this to weaken them. This was a plan that they would all be on their backs in pain and weak. All right? And while they were weak, they attacked. Now, if you think it's just two men that went into the city, no, they're rich. They have lots of servants that are for them, lots of men who are under their command. All right? They take the men under their command, and they go in and they kill every man in the city. And because they're all weak and in pain, they were easy targets. All right? And so that was their plan, and they take all the women as spoil and all the plunder. And of course, when Jacob hears of this, he's furious. He cannot believe what they've done. He's extremely angry with them and lashes them harshly with his tongue. But there's not much else he can do at this point. First of all, you have to think, these are not, kids. These are grown men. They're probably in their 30s, 40s. All right, at least 30s.
A well-executed plan.
It was a well-executed plan. But the point that you have to get in this, like I've said before, and I always have to come back to this, because you are not given a specific, God's specific opinion on this, you might think that it was okay for them to do this. All right? No, it wasn't. You have to take the morality of God's law and apply it to the stories. Did Jacob think it was okay? No. There's not much he could do with it at this point.
But you said he was scared too, because he thought the people would...
And he freaks out at them too, saying, what if now a couple of kings decide to come against us? What will we do now? Like, you idiots. Like, I'm sure it was, his words were, I'm sure it was not pretty to the ears, what Jacob was saying to them. But at this point, there's not much he can do about it. right? And but I don't, on the other hand, want to make the point that these men were innocent victims. They were not innocent victims. What they did to Dinah was evil and wicked. We have to take God's law and apply it. It was a wicked, evil thing that they did, right? And then they had major greed in their hearts. But it does not justify the violence. Okay? Now, should there have been a punishment for Shechem for what he did? Absolutely. Should they have sought that? Yes. But Jacob wasn't sure how to do that without bringing on war. Okay? So it was a very hard situation for him. But I always want to point that out because I don't want you to think somehow that this was a godly act or somehow that God was okay with this. You can't get that from the story. And why can't you? Well, let me explain to you. It's not for about 12 chapters. But 12 chapters from now, these two get a major punishment for what they did. And that's how you know how God feels. The Holy Spirit, Jacob lays his hands on his 12 sons before he dies, and they all get their prophecy, just like Abraham did and Isaac with Jacob and Esau, right? Well, guess who gets very bad prophecies? All right, now, I'm forgetting the exact names. It's, is it Issachar and Simeon?
Oh, Simeon.
Simeon and Levi.
Levi.
And Levi, of course, we know, is taken to be priests. But that's not until they have to earn it. They're not chosen. That's another story. Well, anyway, Levi's prophecy, okay, and Simeon was horrible. That cursed is their anger, and they acted like their violence and all this. Wait till you get there. I'll come back and I'll remind you of this story when we get to that part. All right, but
It's been making noise.
yeah, because I think it's touching my cheek.
It's been making noise all night.
But it won't stay put. It just will not stay put. It just starts to fall down my ear every time. And then I keep catching it down here. Anyway, I'm trying to ignore it. But so you get clearly God's opinion later on for what they did. All right? So I'm telling you that now. Jacob, so don't get, though, in your heart somehow that this was a godly act or somehow God was okay with this. He was not, and he clearly makes that known later on. Okay? But either way, the Lord used it to protect them for people that had a bad motivation. One thing you have to see is the Lord's hand of favor and power is on Jacob and protects him. All right? And that is... you have to accept that, and that is a major part of the story. Jacob in no way was blessed or in any way was understanding of what his sons did. All right? But also the men of Shechem were not innocent victims either. So I'm going to leave it at that. There isn't a ton more to say about it. It's a horrible situation. As far as rape goes, if you're wondering how God's penalty for rape, wait till we get to Leviticus. It's clearly spelled out. Okay? And he says, this is the same case as one who murders. Now, there is an option that the Lord left that if the father, would deal with this child, this man would have to pay the bride price and then will be disciplined. There's also punishable by death, and there's different situations depending. It's not all cut and dry. And you know what? It's not all cut and dry either in our lifetime, is it? It's not exactly across the board premeditated murder. There is premeditated, quick, easy situations that are cut and dry, and then there's gray areas. Have we all seen that? Yes. So anyway, it's the same here. As the Lord has wisdom. But anyway, the point is that don't think that God is okay with rape. Trust me, when we get to that part, you'll see that God sees it as murder. Okay? So, anyway. It doesn't necessarily mean that the man will be put to death, but that is one of the penalties depending on the situation. All right? So, let's move on from this story. Everyone say thank God. Okay. So I went through, I'm purposely, I got through a good amount. We got 3 minutes, but I got through 5 chapters. Now we have this story. And of course, the major thing here is I have this marked, I might as well say it, because it shows Simeon and Levi's answer to Jacob. And that's the main point of their anger. They felt justified, even though they were not, because they said, should they have treated our sister as a harlot? In their mind, what they did to Dinah was so unspeakable that they all deserve death for it. Now, that's not right. It's not God. You can't make that God's opinion, but in their mind, that's how they saw it. Okay, and they saw it as their obligation to protect their sister.
Take vengeance.
You know what I mean? Okay. And of course, what do you have to do in this situation? You have to come back to the law of Moses. What does the law of Moses say when it comes to these situations? Vengeance is mine. I will repay. We are not allowed to take vengeance ourselves. Vengeance in every form is against God. In every form, it's ungodly. There's only one person allowed to take vengeance. The judge of all the earth. And anyway, we're going to get to that. Trust me, I'll spend time on that when we get there. But like I said, why I do that and why I mention those things now is because I want you to get the heart of it now. I want you to, we take the, and learn the proper hermeneutics, my favorite word. By the end of it, you'll actually know what that word means. It means our process of interpretation. How do we interpret these stories? We take the law of God, which is the revelation of good and evil and His law, right? And we apply it to the stories, and that's where we get the judgment. Does everybody get that? So if you're thinking sometimes, well, why didn't we get exactly how God feels about this situation? We take the law and we apply it and we get God's viewpoint. Right? All right. So I got 2 minutes. So then we have this. This is a, now look at this. Look at verse 2. Well, verse 35. Then God said to Jacob, chapter 35. Then God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel, and live there, and make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau. Verse 2, so Jacob said to his household, and to all who are with him, put away the foreign gods which are among you, and purify yourselves, and change your garments. See, I could say this, Jacob is having like a real, you could almost say the word revival in his family. He is going after them now. He realizes, obviously, with what his sons did and what Rachel did, that they have not been really, he hasn't taught them very well. First of all, he spends most of his time working. He's a shepherd, and a hard-working one, right? And obviously, he starts to see that he needs to really reach them now. And get, right? So really, Jacob is now going after his family and all that are with him. And they make a covenant together with God, all of them. All right? And this is where he really charges them to put away and listen, they listen to him. Verse 3, and let us arise and go up to Bethel, and I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress and has been with me wherever I've gone. So they gave to Jacob all the foreign gods which they had, all the rings which were in their ears, which you're wondering about rings in their ears. That goes along with a lot of the pagan things that they did. They had certain rings for certain... Anyway, just trust me on that, okay? Doesn't mean earrings are evil. If you got that, you're wrong. Okay? And Jacob hid them under the oak which was near Shechem, and they journeyed there, there was a great terror upon the cities which were around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Well, why is that in there? Because after what happened, you would expect retaliation. But the Lord brought an incredible terror all around. And of course, they've all heard the stories of Abraham and Isaac, right? And the Lord supernaturally protected them, even though Jacob, of course, in the back of his mind is probably wondering, when is it coming? Right? So we'll stop there. We'll pick it up here in chapter 35. All right, and when God reestablishes the covenant with Jacob and officially changes his name again, so please, I had you read to 40, right?
Yes.
All right, so read to 45. There's 5 chapters this week. All right? And, well, actually, just read the story of Joseph. Actually, when I had to read it 40, you're like all in the middle. So I did it today, and it's like stops in the middle. And it's hard to stop in the middle of Joseph. So finish Joseph, okay? I'm not going to get any farther than that. So just finish the story of Joseph, okay?